I never thought I'd be here, standing in the shadows of this dimly lit hotel hallway, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure someone would hear it. The air was thick with the scent of cheap perfume and desperation, and the muffled sounds of distant laughter and clinking glasses only added to the tension. My heels clicked softly against the carpet as I approached the door, my fingers trembling as I reached for the keycard. I knew he was waiting for me inside. He always was. I slipped into the room, the door closing behind me with a soft click. The room was dark, illuminated only by the faint glow of the city lights filtering through the curtains. I could see him sitting on the edge of the bed, his silhouette familiar and intoxicating. He didn't say a word, but I could feel his eyes on me, burning with a desire that matched my own. "Did anyone see you?" His voice was low, husky, and it sent a shiver down my spine. "No," I whispered, my voice barely audible. I stepped closer, my heart racing as I reached out to touch him. His skin was warm beneath my fingertips, and I could feel the tension in his muscles as he pulled me closer. "You're late," he murmured, his lips brushing against my ear. His breath was hot, sending a wave of heat through my body. "I'm sorry," I breathed, my hands tangling in his hair. "I had to be careful. You know how he is." He chuckled darkly, his hands sliding down my back and pulling me onto his lap. "Careful? With him? Don't make me laugh, Lily. He's too blind to see what's right in front of him." I didn't respond. Instead, I leaned in, capturing his lips in a kiss that was as desperate as it was passionate. His hands were everywhere, exploring, claiming, and I let myself drown in the sensation. It was wrong, so wrong, but I couldn't stop. I didn't want to. We fell back onto the bed, our bodies tangled together in a mess of limbs and heated breaths. His lips trailed down my neck, leaving a trail of fire in their wake, and I arched into him, craving more. My hands fumbled with the buttons of his shirt, desperate to feel his skin against mine. "Lily," he groaned, his voice rough with need. "You're driving me crazy." "Good," I whispered, my hand sliding down his chest. "I want you to lose control." He didn't need any more encouragement. His hands were on my waist, pulling me closer, and I could feel the heat of his body pressing against mine. Every touch, every kiss, every whispered word was a reminder of what we used to have, what we could never have again. But in that moment, none of it mattered. All that mattered was the way he made me feel, the way he made me forget everything else. I gasped as his hands slid under my dress, his fingers tracing patterns on my skin that left me trembling. My breath hitched as he moved lower, his lips following the path his hands had taken. I could feel the heat building inside me, threatening to consume me, and I clung to him, desperate for release. "Jake," I moaned, his name slipping from my lips like a prayer. "Please." He didn't need to be told twice. His hands were on my hips, pulling me closer, and I could feel the intensity of his gaze as he looked up at me. "You're mine, Lily," he growled, his voice filled with possessiveness. "Always have been, always will be." I didn't argue. I couldn't, because in that moment I knew he was right. No matter how much I tried to deny it, no matter how much I tried to move on, I would always be his. And as he claimed me, as our bodies moved together in a rhythm that was as familiar as it was intoxicating, I let myself forget about the world outside, about the man waiting for me at home, about the life I was supposed to be living. All that mattered was him. All that mattered was us. But even as I lost myself in the moment, a small part of me couldn't help but wonder how long we could keep this up. How long before someone found out? How long before everything came crashing down around us? I pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on the way he made me feel, the way he made me forget. Because in that moment, nothing else mattered. Nothing else existed. It was just him and me, and the fire that burned between us, a fire that could never be extinguished. The room was silent except for the sound of our ragged breathing, the air thick with the scent of sweat and passion. I lay there, my head resting on Jake's chest, his heartbeat steady beneath my ear. His fingers traced lazy patterns on my arm, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. But the reality of what we were doing, what we had just done, started to creep back in, and the guilt began to gnaw at the edges of my mind. I sat up, pulling the sheet around me as I glanced at the clock on the nightstand. It was late. Too late. I needed to get back before Michael started to wonder where I was. He wasn't the type to ask too many questions, but I couldn't risk it. Not now. Where are you going? Jake's voice was soft, but there was an edge to it that made me pause. I have to go, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You know I can't stay. He sighed, running a hand through his hair as he sat up. Lily, this can't keep happening. We can't keep doing this. I turned to look at him, my heart aching at the pain in his eyes. I know, I said, my voice breaking. But I can't stop. I can't just turn off how I feel about you. Then leave him, Jake said, his voice firm. Leave him and be with me. We can figure this out. We can make it work. I shook my head, tears welling up in my eyes. You know it's not that simple. Michael, he's a good man. He doesn't deserve this. And what about us? Jake asked, his voice rising. What about what we deserve? We were happy once, Lily. We can be happy again. I don't know. I whispered, my voice trembling. I don't know if I can do that to him. Jake reached out, his hand cupping my cheek as he forced me to look at him. You're not happy with him, Lily. You're just going through the motions. I can see it in your eyes. You're not the same person you were when we were together. I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but I couldn't. Because deep down I knew he was right. I wasn't happy with Michael. I hadn't been for a long time. But that didn't make this any easier. I need time, I said finally, my voice barely audible. I need to figure this out. Jake nodded, his expression softening. Take all the time you need. But know this, Lily. I'm not going anywhere. I'll wait for you. I'll always wait for you. I leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to his lips before pulling away. I have to go, I said again, my voice filled with regret. He didn't stop me as I got dressed, his eyes following my every move. I could feel the weight of his gaze on me, and it made my heart ache. But I couldn't stay. Not tonight. I slipped out of the room, the door closing softly behind me. The hallway was empty and I made my way to the elevator, my mind racing. I knew I couldn't keep doing this. I knew I had to make a choice. But how could I choose between the man I was supposed to marry and the man I had never stopped loving? The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside, leaning against the wall as I tried to steady my breathing. I needed to get home. I needed to act like nothing had happened. But as the elevator descended, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to come crashing down. When I got home, the house was quiet. Michael was in the living room watching TV, and he looked up as I walked in. Hey, he said, his voice casual. Where have you been? I went out with some friends, I lied, forcing a smile. We lost track of time. He nodded, not questioning me further. All right. Just next time let me know, okay? I was starting to worry. I will, I said, my heart sinking as I realized how easy it was to lie to him. I'm sorry. He smiled, and for a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. But then he turned back to the TV, and I knew I had to push those feelings aside. I couldn't let him see how torn I was. I couldn't let him know the truth. I went upstairs, my mind still racing as I got ready for bed. I knew I couldn't keep living like this. I knew I had to make a choice. But as I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't help but wonder if there was a way to have it all. If there was a way to keep both Michael and Jake in my life without losing myself in the process. But deep down I knew the truth. I knew that eventually I would have to choose. And when that time came, I wasn't sure if I would be strong enough to make the right decision. The days blurred together after that night. I tried to focus on my life with Michael, on the wedding plans that were slowly coming together. But every time I looked at him, I couldn't help but feel the weight of my guilt pressing down on me. I had betrayed him. And no matter how much I tried to convince myself that it was just a mistake, I knew it was more than that. It was a choice I had made willingly. Michael, of course, had no idea. He was kind, attentive, and everything a fiancé should be. But the more he tried to make me happy, the more I felt the distance between us growing. I couldn't shake the memory of Jake's touch, the way he made me feel alive in a way Michael never could. It was unfair to compare them, but I couldn't help it. Jake was my past, my present, and, if I was honest with myself, my future. One evening, as I was sorting through wedding invitations, Michael walked into the room with a smile on his face. Hey, I was thinking we could go out tonight. Just the two of us. It's been a while since we've had a proper date. I forced a smile, my heart sinking at the thought of spending the evening pretending everything was fine. That sounds nice, I said, though the words felt hollow. We went to a small Italian restaurant downtown, the kind of place that was cozy and intimate. Michael held my hand across the table, his thumb brushing over my knuckles as he talked about his day. I tried to listen, to be present, but my mind kept drifting back to Jake. I wondered what he was doing, if he was thinking about me as much as I was thinking about him. "Lily," Michael said, his voice pulling me out of my thoughts. "Is everything okay? You seem distant." I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. For a moment I considered telling him the truth, confessing everything and hoping he would understand. But I couldn't do it. Not here. Not now. "I'm just tired," I lied, forcing another smile. "Wedding planning is more stressful than I thought it would be." He nodded, his expression softening. "I get it. But don't forget, we're in this together. If you need help, just ask." "I will," I said, though I knew I wouldn't. How could I ask for his help when I was the one tearing us apart? The rest of the evening passed in a blur. We talked. We laughed, and I did my best to act like everything was normal. But the guilt was eating away at me, and by the time we got home I was exhausted. That night, as I lay in bed next to Michael, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing, filled with thoughts of Jake and the life we could have had together. I knew I was being selfish, that I was hurting the man who loved me more than anything. But I couldn't stop myself from wanting more. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Jake. "I need to see you. Tonight. 8 p.m. Usual place." My heart skipped a beat as I read the message. I knew I shouldn't go, that I should stay away from him and focus on my life with Michael. But the thought of seeing Jake again, of feeling his touch, was too much to resist. I spent the day in a daze, my mind constantly drifting back to the text. I tried to focus on work, on the wedding plans, but it was no use. By the time evening rolled around, I was a nervous wreck. I told Michael I was going out with friends again, and he didn't question it. He trusted me, and that only made me feel worse. But I pushed the guilt aside as I drove to the hotel, my heart pounding with anticipation. When I walked into the room, Jake was waiting for me, just like he always was. He didn't say a word as he pulled me into his arms, his lips crashing against mine in a kiss that was filled with longing and desperation. "I missed you," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "I missed you too," I replied, my voice trembling as I clung to him. We didn't talk after that. There was no need for words. Our bodies spoke for us, moving together in a rhythm that was as familiar as it was intoxicating. Every touch, every kiss, every whispered word was a reminder of what we had lost, and what we could never have again. But even as I lost myself in the moment, a small part of me couldn't help but wonder how long we could keep this up. How long before someone found out? How long before everything came crashing down around us? I pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on the way he made me feel, the way he made me forget. Because in that moment nothing else mattered. Nothing else existed. It was just him and me. And the fire that burned between us. A fire that could never be extinguished. The next morning, I woke up in the hotel room alone. The sheets were cold where Jake had been, and the silence felt heavy, suffocating. I sat up, my head spinning as I tried to piece together the events of the night before. It had been intense, more so than usual. There was a desperation in the way we had come together, as if we both knew this couldn't last. But neither of us had the strength to let go. I got dressed quickly, my hands trembling as I buttoned my blouse. The room still smelled of him, of us, and it made my stomach churn with a mix of guilt and longing. I needed to get out of there, to clear my head before I faced Michael again. But as I reached for the door, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Jake. "Last night was something, but we need to talk. Meet me at the park. Usual spot. 10 a.m. I stared at the message, my heart pounding. What could he possibly want to talk about? Was he finally going to end this? Or was he going to ask me to leave Michael for good? I didn't know which option scared me more. I arrived at the park a few minutes early, my nerves on edge. The air was crisp, the kind of cold that bites at your skin and makes you feel alive. I spotted Jake sitting on a bench near the pond, his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets. He looked up as I approached, his expression unreadable. "Hey," I said softly, sitting down beside him. "Hey," he replied, his voice low. He didn't look at me, his eyes fixed on the water. We sat in silence for a while, the tension between us palpable. I wanted to say something to break the silence, but I didn't know where to start. Finally, Jake spoke. "This can't keep happening, Lily," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "We can't keep doing this to each other." To him. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "I know," I whispered, "but I don't know how to stop." "You have to," he said, finally turning to look at me. His eyes were filled with a pain that mirrored my own. "You have to choose. Him or me. You can't have both." I felt tears welling up in my eyes, and I quickly blinked them away. "It's not that simple, Jake. I care about Michael. I don't want to hurt him." "But you're already hurting him," he said, his voice rising. "Every time you sneak off to see me, you're lying to him. You're betraying him. And for what? A few stolen moments? Is that really worth it?" I didn't have an answer, 'cause deep down, I knew he was right. I was hurting Michael and I was hurting myself. But the thought of letting Jake go, of walking away from the only man who had ever truly understood me, was unbearable. "I need time," I said finally, my voice trembling. "I need to figure this out." Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Time isn't going to make this any easier, Lily. The longer you wait, the harder it's going to be." "I know," I said, tears streaming down my face. "But I can't just choose. Not yet." He reached out, his hand brushing against mine. "I'll wait for you," he said softly, "but not forever. You need to decide what you want. And when you do, I'll be here." I nodded, my heart breaking as I realized the weight of what he was saying. He was giving me an ultimatum, and sooner or later, I was going to have to make a choice. We sat there for a while longer, the silence between us heavy with unspoken words. Finally, I stood up, my legs shaky beneath me. "I should go," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Jake nodded, his eyes filled with a sadness that mirrored my own. "Take care of yourself, Lily." I turned and walked away, my heart aching with every step. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep hurting the people I loved. I had to make a choice. And soon. When I got home, Michael was in the kitchen making coffee. He looked up as I walked in, a smile on his face. "Hey, where've you been?" I was starting to worry. "I went for a walk," I lied, forcing a smile. "I needed to clear my head." He nodded, not questioning me further. "Well, I'm glad you're back. I was thinking we could spend the day together. Just the two of us." "That sounds nice," I said, though the words felt hollow. I knew I couldn't keep lying to him, but I didn't know how to tell him the truth. How could I explain that I was torn between the man I was supposed to marry and the man I had never stopped loving? We spent the day together, but my mind was elsewhere. Every time Michael smiled at me, every time he touched me, I felt a pang of guilt. I knew I didn't deserve him, but I couldn't bring myself to walk away. Not yet. That night, as I lay in bed next to Michael, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing, filled with thoughts of Jake and the choice I knew I had to make. I couldn't keep living like this, torn between two men, two lives. I had to make a decision, and when I did, I knew it would change everything. The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and restless thoughts. I tried to focus on my life with Michael, on the wedding plans that were now just weeks away. But every time I looked at him, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was living a lie. I had betrayed him in the worst possible way, and no matter how much I tried to convince myself that it was just a mistake, I knew it was more than that. It was a choice I had made willingly. Jake's words haunted me. "You have to choose. Him or me. You can't have both." I knew he was right, but the thought of letting go of either of them was unbearable. Michael was my fiancé, the man I was supposed to spend the rest of my life with. But Jake was the man who had always understood me, the man who made me feel alive in a way Michael never could. One evening, as I was sitting on the couch, flipping through a wedding magazine, Michael sat down beside me. "Lily, we need to talk," he said, his voice serious. My heart skipped a beat. Had he found out? Did he know about Jake? I tried to keep my voice steady as I replied. What's wrong? He took a deep breath, his expression pained. I've noticed that you've been distant lately. Like you're not really here. And I can't help but feel like there's something you're not telling me. I felt a lump form in my throat, and I quickly looked away.
I'm sorry, he whispered.
I've just been stressed with the wedding and everything. Michael reached out, his hand gently tilting my chin so I was forced to look at him. Lily, I know you. And I know when something's wrong. Please just talk to me. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. And I quickly blinked them away. Michael, I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to tell him the truth. To confess everything and beg for his forgiveness. But the words wouldn't come. Michael's expression softened, and he pulled me into a hug. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together. I love you, Lily. And I'm not going anywhere. I buried my face in his chest, the guilt and shame overwhelming me. How could I have betrayed this man? This kind, loving man who had done nothing but care for me. I didn't deserve him. I didn't deserve his love or his forgiveness. That night, as I lay in bed next to Michael, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing, filled with thoughts of Jake and the choice I knew I had to make. I couldn't keep living like this, torn between two men, two lives. I had to make a decision, and when I did, I knew it would change everything. The next morning, I woke up early, my mind made up. I couldn't keep lying to Michael. I couldn't keep betraying him. I had to end things with Jake. No matter how much it hurt. I owed Michael that much. I sent Jake a text, asking him to meet me at the park. He replied almost immediately, agreeing to meet me at our usual spot. When I arrived, Jake was already there, sitting on the bench by the pond. He looked up as I approached, his expression unreadable. Hey, I said softly, sitting down beside him. Hey, he replied, his voice low. He didn't look at me, his eyes fixed on the water. We sat in silence for a while, the tension between us palpable. Finally I spoke. Jake, I can't keep doing this, I said, my voice trembling. I can't keep lying to Michael. I can't keep betraying him. Jake nodded, his expression pained. I know, he said softly. I've been thinking the same thing. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, and I quickly blinked them away. I care about you, Jake. I always will. But I can't keep living like this. I have to choose. And I choose Michael. Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. I understand, he said, his voice heavy with emotion. I just want you to be happy, Lily. And if that means being with him, then I'll respect that. I felt a lump form in my throat, and I quickly looked away. Thank you, I whispered. We sat there for a while longer, the silence between us heavy with unspoken words. Finally, I stood up, my legs shaky beneath me. I should go, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Jake nodded, his eyes filled with a sadness that mirrored my own. Take care of yourself, Lily. I turned and walked away, my heart aching with every step. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't keep living like this. I had made my choice, and now I had to live with it. When I got home, Michael was in the kitchen making coffee. He looked up as I walked in, a smile on his face. Hey, where have you been? I was starting to worry. I went for a walk, I said, forcing a smile. I needed to clear my head. He nodded, not questioning me further. Well, I'm glad you're back. I was thinking we could spend the day together. Just the two of us. That sounds nice, I said, though the words felt hollow. I knew I couldn't keep lying to him, but I didn't know how to tell him the truth. How could I explain that I was torn between the man I was supposed to marry and the man I had never stopped loving? We spent the day together, but my mind was elsewhere. Every time Michael smiled at me, every time he touched me, I felt a pang of guilt. I knew I didn't deserve him, but I couldn't bring myself to walk away. Not yet. That night, as I lay in bed next to Michael, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing, filled with thoughts of Jake and the choice I had made. I couldn't keep living like this, torn between two men, two lives. I had to make a decision, and when I did, I knew it would change everything.